All right, everybody. Is this a big win for Lena Khan? The FTC just banned non-competes. 3 of 3 people voted this up, of the 3 besties who decided to vote on the docket. Federal Trade Commission this week voted by a 3-2 margin to ban non-competes. To give you a sense of the impact here, estimated of 18% of the total U.S. workforce are covered in some way by non-competes, 30 million people. The ruling bans agreements entirely and requires companies to let their staff know that non-competes are not enforceable. There are a few exceptions, like existing non-competes for senior level executives. I'm guessing when you buy a company, you can get somebody to non-compete for buying their company. The Democratic FTC Commissioner, Rebecca Slaughter, called non-competes unfree and unfair. One of the dissenting commissioners, Republican Andrew Ferguson, said the FTC lacked authority from Congress to make this ruling without specifying whether or not he agreed with it. Theoretically, the new rule takes effect in 120 days. Wow, we're on a fast timeline, after which the vast majority of existing non-competes will be unenforceable. Here in California, they're not enforceable, as we know, except under certain circumstances. So this is really an East Coast thing. People in Boston, New York, they're really affected by this. And people will actually enforce these for things as silly as hairdressers. There was a big lawsuit by hairdressers who had to sign like 50-mile non-competes with their beauty salons. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce says it plans to follow suit over the ruling. FTC says the rule will create 8,500 new startups a year because people can leave and compete. Friedberg, your thoughts?
In California, non-competes are not enforceable, but outside of California, they are, and they're often used, like in the agriculture industry, in the ag inputs industry, where folks are developing new technology, mostly at companies based in the Midwest and the East Coast. As you guys know, in financial services as well, they're often used that if you work for one company because you have a lot of trade secrets, you can't carry them over to others. But in Silicon Valley, we're very used to engineers, product managers, executives taking all of the knowledge and capabilities that they've developed at one business and leveraging that into a new role. It creates a dynamically competitive marketplace. It also inflates, obviously, costs because you're willing to pay more for someone who's worked directly at a competitor and has deep knowledge. But they are bringing IP often, and there is, a real risk that they take something from your company that you've invested in them to understand, and they take it to your competitor. So I see both sides of this. I think non-competes give companies the ability to invest in employees and feel confident that the knowledge and information and support they're providing to those employees doesn't ultimately find its way over to a competitor. And it gives you a rationale for paying more to your employees. It actually inflates salaries. If I'm fearful that someone might leave and take knowledge with them, I'm going to share less with the employee. I'm going to pay them less. So I could see this going both ways. I'm really fairly torn on this issue, to be honest. I don't know what the right answer is, or if there really is a strong kind of ethical case one way or the other. I think that non-competes can both benefit and hurt employees and benefit and hurt companies.
Yes, there are unintended consequences. Chamath, where do you stand on this? Is this a huge win for Lena Khan, neutral, or a loss?
I don't see non-competes having any value in any market except East Coast financial markets. I've heard of folks getting something called beach leave, typically in finance. These are Wall Street jobs, hedge fund jobs. So I know it exists there.
What does it mean, beach leave?
Like if you leave hedge fund A and you're going to go to hedge fund B, they make you sit on ice for 6 months or 9 months, garden leave, I think maybe they call it. And the whole idea is that you don't take any active market thoughts to your next job. For what Friedberg said, I just think the whole thing doesn't make much sense. I mean, like, intellectual property is the least valuable it's ever been, right? More people develop things now via trade secret than patents. The whole patent system has become a little bit of a game.
We just talked about open source, right?
They have less and less value. So innovation is happening in plain sight. And so I don't think companies are actually thinking about this issue at all anymore. They're paying people because they need to pay more to get the best and brightest. So I think if you're hoping to rely on one of these agreements, if you're an employer, I think that you should just forget about them and just hire the best people, pay them the best, and if they suck, fire them.
Did you ever see that movie, Spanish Prisoner, starring Steve Martin? You guys ever see that film?
Great film. God,
Great
wow, that's
film.
a deep pull.
Steve Martin plays the con man that goes to this guy, and the guy is like a chemical engineer. Campbell Scott is the guy's name, the actor. And he has like a process for making a chemical, and it's worth so much money. And the whole movie is Steve Martin conning him into telling him the chemical process. And eventually he took it. He was going to give him all this money, hire him. And then he disappeared once he got the knowledge. And that was the end of it. It's a great, great film.
Shout out David Mamet.
David Mamet, exactly.
Yeah, fantastic.
But I think there's a lot of investment that goes into intellectual property businesses that include things like chemical engineering, obviously financial services, trading companies, algos in hedge funds, and a lot in software, that if you can access that intellectual property without stealing it, but actually hiring an employee that has it in their head, you gain quite a lot.
But you can do that now. I don't see it actually doing anything bad.
So I have had a lot of folks that I know in other industries outside of tech or software where California non-competes are not enforceable that aren't allowed to go work at a competitor for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years.
No. I'm not disputing that it doesn't exist. I'm saying, where do you see it actually having negative repercussions in California? The point of the fact that it doesn't exist here is also seemingly that it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, the rate of change here is crazy. Like the rate at which software changes, I think, is quite distinct from the rate at which, for example, a chemical engineering process might change. Where you learn that process, you spend $200 million building a system, and then that employee can go and tell it to someone else and suddenly changes everything about that other business. So I don't know. I feel like there's something about California software that gives us this point of view that maybe it doesn't matter, but in other industries it might.
In that example, you'd still need to come up with hundreds of millions of CapEx to implement it, whatever you know.
Yeah.
So,
Sachs, any thoughts?
I just don't think these things mean anything.
Yeah. Do you care about non-compete, Sachs?
I think one of the reasons why the tech industry moves so fast and innovates so well is because of the happy coincidence that California doesn't allow non-competes, and so the industry's never had them. And as a result of that, like you're saying, the talent just flows freely to wherever the opportunity is. And you have this dynamic in tech where the VCs and the talent all swarm the biggest and best opportunities and the newest platforms in a completely decentralized way. And there's little or no friction in doing that. If you were to impose non-competes on all of the talent, there's going to be enormous delays and friction in them moving around to pursue opportunities. And so I think it's been very beneficial to the industry as a whole that we don't have that. Now, it's hard for me to speak to other industries, but I think that if you're looking to maximize the pace of innovation, you wouldn't have these employee non-competes. So on that level, I kind of agree with what Lina Khan's done. That being said, I do think the Republicans' point was well taken in the sense that this was very aggressive rulemaking. I mean, I think you could legitimately argue that a change this big should be made by Congress, but I tend to think this is probably a positive change.
I think this is great what Lina Khan's doing. And this is 2 for 2. I think her Apple action was great. I think this is great. Love to have her at the summit. That would be an amazing fireside chat. So if anybody knows her, invite her to the summit. There really is 3-way. Oh, and by the way, Chamath, media business on the East Coast also does this. And that's why friend of the pod, Tucker Carlson, and Don Lemon, both of them started shows on the internet, not other networks, because they have very tight non-competes and it's pay to play. They got paid out their full contracts according to reports. And so there is something, I think, in a middle ground here, Chamath, where if you do want somebody to not compete, you got to pay to play. In other words, they're getting
but this
paid.
is what I'm saying. It just tends to be examples, Jason, over and over of markets that don't really matter that much, relying on these things, and markets that are dynamic and add value in humanity, just moving past them. So it probably makes sense for all of us to just go move past them.
Absolutely, 100%. This is going to be great for the economy. Sachs, you were going to say something?
Well, just because these agreements are no longer enforceable doesn't mean that businesses don't have moats. It just means you have to look in other places. I mean, you have to find network effects. You have to find data scale effects. There's other ways of building a moat.
Product.
Besides just trade secrets or patents is another category where, in the tech industry, patents have never really mattered that much. And the only people who are seeking to litigate patents are basically patent trolls.
Losers.
So you want to find real durable moats, not these like legal arrangements that try to protect your business through these types of
That's
contracts.
well said. That's really well said. That's exactly what I was trying to say. That's well said.
Well said. Team, product, brand. These are the ways to build a great business, not legal
and by the way,
shenanigans.
one of the reasons why the industry moves so fast is because best practices get shared very quickly. And
Yes.
one of the ways that happens is that everybody is moving around to different companies. I mean, what's the average
such a good
term
point.
of employment? 1 or 2
18
years.
to
And-
36 months.
Right. And you don't have to worry that if you've got some knowledge in your head, that you don't have to worry that if you use it at some new company, you're going to violate some trade secret. But the one thing everyone knows not to do is take anything with them in terms of,
Not
IP.
everybody.
Not
Well-
Lewandowski. Was that his name?
Lewandowski.
Well, that's why it's really stupid.
What an idiot. Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes people do break the rules. I mean, the rule is you don't take any work product with you. You don't take any documents.
No thumb
You don't-
drives, dip.
Don't bring your old computer to the new
No.
job. Don't bring any old code.
No docs.
And there are people who violate those rules, and that is definitely breaking the rules. But you're allowed to take with you anything in your head. And it is one of the ways that best practices sort of become more common.
You guys know the story, right? Like Steve Chen, before he started YouTube, was an engineer at Facebook. And there was like, at one point, I remember being in some meeting where it was like, oh, I think we found an early version of the YouTube code on an old laptop that was a Facebook laptop that Steve owned. So I remember like the GC was like, I think we technically own YouTube.
That's a good general
I don't
counsel.
think we own YouTube. Could you imagine if Facebook sued Google to get YouTube?
Speaking
my
of
God.
startups, this is critically important for founders listening. If you're working at a company, the best practice is if you're going to do a side hustle is to get permission and a waiver from your boss that you're working on that.
And
then
get
also,
a clean machine.
And you
get a
got to
clean
go on a
machine.
clean machine. Your machine is being
Cannot
monitored.
use your work computer.
Your
Oh my
work
God.
machine, I'm telling you right now, is being monitored every step of the way. I had...
Well, it's not just monitoring. It's
a
about
monitor.
who owns that
it's
IP.
their property. It's their property.
Absolutely. And if you type on it, especially in this work from home era, and anyway, I had a situation, I wouldn't say at which company, where a sales executive left the company, went into the CRM system, downloaded it, and he was so dumb. He had written plans for his next employer on his computer, and then in his corporate emailed the database and his
God.
plans for the new employer to his Yahoo or Outlook
my God.
email.
Oh my God.
They busted him.
Of course.
They dropped a legal letter on him. They put a legal letter on the person who's hiring him. The person who
Of
hired him
course.
rescinds the offer. Obviously, they don't want some toxic nonsense. And the person, I have no idea what happened to him.
There's that very famous email that Steve Jobs sent to Bruce Chizen, which goes something along the lines of, Dear Bruce, it's come to my attention that Apple never recruits from Adobe, but it seems like Adobe is actively recruiting Apple employees. One of our practices have to change.
Steve
So
Jobs is a
strong.
gangster.
Please let me know who or something like that. It's just a phenomenal email.
Yeah, and this actually resulted in a bunch of legal action, a settlement, because I think Eric Schmidt and Steve Jobs, correct me if I'm wrong, producers, or there was something between Google and Apple where they agreed, and I think Sergey or somebody was
This is correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Sergey got in on this. I don't know if this is legal, but they didn't want to piss Steve off because it's not the kind of guy you want to piss off because he can execute. And Eric Schmidt was on the board of Apple at the time. There's a very famous picture of them at the Sand Hill Road or Stanford Mall having coffee, and Steve is lit. He's not happy about this. And I think they agreed to not poach a certain level or something like that. Oh, there's the famous picture where they were breaking bread, and then Eric Schmidt did Android. Steve felt very betrayed by this, and Eric Schmidt left the board of Apple shortly thereafter because Steve reportedly felt like he was double-crossed. But, all that is speculation, so check your own facts. Do you have any other details on that, Freeberg? Do you remember that case? It was after your time, right?
I'll tell you a funny story. We had a meeting with the exec team from Apple when I was at Google, and Marissa Mayer and Sergey and myself and one other person went to the meeting, And Marissa's idea was, why don't we pitch Apple that we could put a cache of the internet in 200 megabytes, like the most important 200 megabytes of the internet, cache it and put it on the iPod so you could access the internet on the iPod.
Surf the web. Right.
Wow.
So
So
super cool.
basically search a cached version of the web. And that was the pitch. And they kind of were like radio silent. They didn't respond to the pitch. And then they kind of blank-faced stared at us. 2 years later, the iPhone came out.